All right, everyone, we're going to begin chapter one here on day one. But before we begin, I'd like for you to pause the video and just do a little bit of a pre-lab, if you will, or a pre-workshop. So take a minute and think about how you picture your life in 1 year, and then 2 to 5 years out, and then 10 years out. What are the things you're doing? Where do you live? Etc. So just take a minute. A little bullet point list is fine. Pause the video, and then when you get done, go ahead and resume. So welcome to Module 1, Day 1. This first part of the lecture is about goal setting, and then financial planning comes in the back end when we think about figuring out where you currently sit financially. So part 1 here is a financial planning process and goal setting. This section, day 1, has 2 workshops. Workshop 1 is going to be about goals, and workshop 2 is the personal balance sheet. That is going to come in the second video that you'll watch after this one. So the financial planning process has 6 steps, and they are not surprising. First thing you got to do, though, is define your goals. And that seems weird to think about finance class having to do anything with personal goals. But what we'll learn very soon is that anything that we really want to do in the future requires some level of financial support and financial stability. So we'll define those goals. Those are going to help us to think about the plans and the strategies that we need to put in place to make it to those goals. I'm about to have a kid. And so years ago, thinking about this, we began allocating money away towards creating a nursery, a change in healthcare plans, etc. Now, Carson, my son that's going to be born, he's not got a dollar value on his head, but he certainly requires financial stability, to bring him comfortably into the world. So you develop those plans and strategies, then you implement them. Duh. But we're going to do these first 3 steps in this class. You're going to have a bunch of financial analyses and personal reflection to build upon when you leave this course, because when you implement them, things are going to go wrong. So you're going to have to periodically develop and implement budgets to monitor your progress. And when they go wrong, you're going to have to evaluate with the financial statements that we'll use why they went wrong and the things that you can do to correct them. And then once you correct them, you'll have to figure out, how well you're still tracking towards your goals. You may have to redefine your goals and revise plans. Now, when you think about financial goals, the question I want to ask you is, who are you and what do you want in the future? A lot of people, when they think about personal finances, they just think about wealth management. But I didn't ask you, how much do you want to make in the future? I asked, who do you want to be? Who are you now, and who do you want to be in the future? What do you want to do? Those are 2 very different things. Now, in the future, you might want to be rich. You might want to have a lot of wealth. In that case, you do want to maximize your wealth. Either way, we need to think about goals determining our future financial need. And our future financial need then determines our financial plans. So it all starts with goals. We're going to take a minute and talk about goal setting. So you may have heard of SMART goals before. And SMART is just an acronym. But being smart about our goals helps us to create goals that we can accomplish. First of all, a goal needs to be specific. Now, think to yourself, what's wrong with picking a goal that is, I want a new vehicle? I want a new vehicle. Well, that's not a very specific goal. What kind of vehicle? How big? How much will it cost? What do you need it to do? There's a lot of questions here that could be solved by being more specific. So for example, I want a black Chevy Tahoe with leather seats and a towing package. because I want to buy a boat someday. That may or may not be P. Roush specific goal, but do you see how that's measurable? I'll know I achieved that goal when I have that specific good. And so I actually gave away the second one, measurable, right? Being specific helps us be measurable. And usually what that means is put your goal into a dollar value, right? If you need to be able to achieve a specific goal, then it usually requires some sort of financial outlay to get there. Put it in dollars. That way you know when you have enough money and you purchase the good, you can check that off the box, measure it. Yes, I achieved that goal. Attainable is a weird one. Attainable means possible. When you graduate, you're going to have a career and you're going to have a pretty fixed income stream and a pretty fixed level of expenditure based on where you live. So if your specific goal is to obtain a vehicle and you pick a pretty expensive one, but we work in fast food and you need it in a month, that's going to be tight. It's not going to be a very attainable goal. So you want to make the goals that you're setting possible to achieve. Realistic sounds like the same thing, but realistic has to do with a little bit more personal reflection. The question you ask with a goal being realistic is, am I willing or able to try to achieve this goal? An example I like to think is, what if I set a goal to eat broccoli every day? Now that's attainable. I could certainly go get some broccoli and eat it every day, but I don't like broccoli. So it's not realistic that I'm actually going to stick to it and do this goal. Realistic is good because if you want to save towards something, but you're going to commit yourself to never going out, never going to the bar, never buying a beer, never having any fun to save for this one goal, that's not very realistic because you're probably going to screw up and go do it. So we need to make sure our goals are attainable, possible to achieve, and realistic, meaning I know myself and my behaviors, and so I will be able to commit towards the plans to achieve this goal. And the last thing is timely. Really, everything falls to place once we put a time frame on our goals. If I want to buy a car, specific car, and it's attainable and a realistic goal for me, then if I don't put a timeline on it, I may never actually get around to buying that car. So for example, I need a car in a year. Well, then I can figure out how much I need to save for the down payment for a year. However, if I never put a timeline on it, I never may get there because I don't know exactly when I need to have that measurable amount to achieve my goal. So being smart helps us stay on track with our financial plans. When you design your goals, you want to think about 3 stages of life. You have immediate goals, so stuff that needs to happen within the first year. For example, I want to put a home gym in my house. That could be a short-term goal that you save for all year and then buy at the end of the year. Intermediate goals are somewhere between 2 and 5 years out. So, for example, you live in an apartment now. You want to get a good mortgage, and so you're going to save up for a down payment on a house. So that's going to be a pretty large financial outlay of cash, and so you need to think about saving several years for that. Then you have your long-term goals, which are out there, 6 years to the next 30 or 40 years. And these can be like, I want to buy a beach house someday, or I want to retire at 62 with this amount of money. These long-term goals need to be thought about as well. And so what's interesting about all of these goals is they each require short-term commitments. So as we move through this class, and I have you build a budget out and think about the different types of savings vehicles and investment vehicles you could get into, and the other financial decisions you want to make, we need to make sure that we're making room for progress towards all 3 types of your goals, or else you're never going to achieve them. The other thing we need to pay attention to is that we don't exist alone. It's not just our own decisions and our own behaviors that impact our financial well-being. So when you look at this flow diagram, I want you to focus on consumers. All the arrows going into the consumer box represent things that increase our wealth or well-being. So if you think about consumers, they receive money and payments of wages, interest, and profit from supplying labor to businesses, right? So we get an arrow in money in our pockets, right? At the same time, what do we do with that money? Well, we spend it on goods and services. If we thought about just financial planning being about, hey, I need to spend less than I bring in, it would just be these red arrows. Okay, I go buy things, I make more money, and then I spend stuff. And so if I have extra left over, then I save. But not all of that is necessarily always in our control. The government is also an actor, and businesses are also an actor. And for example, one thing that's largely out of your control as a consumer is taxes, right? That is a cash outflow from your earnings towards the government. Now, you do get some kickbacks in terms of benefits from the government, but the good financial planner is aware of how much they're getting out of in taxes out of their income and how much they're receiving in benefits, etc., from the government. Additionally, when you're looking at the return on your employment and the return on your investments to businesses, economic fluctuations can affect how much money you get back. So let's clear that up. The point from this graph being, a lot of things are in consumers' control to try to improve their financial well-being. Some things are not. We need to be aware of them to make smart decisions around them. One of those would be looking at the fluctuations in the larger economy. So what I'm showing you here is the U.S. gross domestic product. That's a measure of the total market value of goods and services in the United States over time. And you can see this is billions of dollars. And so from 98 until 2016, I'm plotting this, and we can see some big dips shaded in gray in how much goods and services are being produced and consumed in the United States. We call a big dip like this an economic contraction. And what's important about these to the financial planner, and there's some economics behind this we'll talk about later, but when the economy starts to weaken, interest rates fall. And when it's strong, interest rates go up. Well, why do we care about that? Well, let's say we're here, right here at the end of 2007, beginning of 2008, and we have a large chunk of cash from our great aunt Trudy gave us a bunch of money for graduation. And you want to invest it. And you have a decision to make. Do I want this to have a fixed interest rate on my saving, like a CD at a bank? Or do I want it to have a variable interest rate, something that might move with the markets? What would you do? If you were here right at the beginning and you knew that maybe economists were predicting a dip in economic activity, you would probably choose the fixed rate, right? You put your money in a savings account and then interest rates fall. If you have a variable rate, the return on your savings is going to fall. If it's fixed, that can't happen. So there's an example there where you might pay attention to the economy and be able to save yourself some money, right? It's important, and we're going to look at this. You'll be able to do this exact graph by the time we get to the end of the class, but it's important to think about small differences in interest rates producing large differences in outcome over time. So what this graph is showing us is the outcome of investing $1,000 today at 6% interest versus 4% interest when we reinvest annually. And what we see is that in 40 years, that 4% return only got us $4,800. But at the end of 40 years, if we had just 2 percentage points more on our interest rate, maybe if we picked a fixed one versus a variable interest rate, we would have $10,000. So $6,000, a little less than $6,000 more dollars just from having 2 percentage points more on our savings rate. Another example of why economic fluctuations are important is inflation. Now, inflation is the change in the price level over time. So you want to think about everything having sort of an average price. Inflation measures whether that's going up or down within a given time period, whether things are getting more expensive or less expensive. Well, on average, inflation bounces around 2 to 2.5% over time. And so what does this mean? Well, this might be important to the financial decision maker because every time you get a 2% increase on anything you earn, that red arrow that was coming into your consumer box, let's say you get a 2% increase, a 2% raise on your income, or your mutual fund gains 2% more over a given time period. Well, if everything else also got 2% more expensive, you're actually no richer than you were before. Your earnings have to outpace inflation for you to actually gain wealth. And so the good financial planner is also going to pay attention to the raises she gets or the interest rate that she gets on her mutual fund and make sure that she's out earning inflation, not be so excited over what would actually be just cost of living adjustments. So that ends section 1 of day 1's lecture. We have another one to go. A nice, easy warm-up workshop we'll start with here. If you'll download in the module folder, workshop module 1, day 1, financial goal setting. We're going to start out, we're going to start your journey of planning your first year out of college. And so when we think about financial planning, again, we start with goals, and that's exactly what you're going to do. What I would like you to do is fill out your goals. I want you to make educated guesses on cost. So if you have a goal over here, you don't really know what it costs, ballpark it. Don't go crazy. Don't go researching a lot. Just get an estimate. I want you to ignore priorities for now in terms of prioritizing them. But think about specific, measurable, timely goals. And so flesh that out. The one thing I will say going forward is you're going to be turning in a lot of workshops to me where I ask for you to do personal financial planning on your behalf. If you are uncomfortable turning in actual projections for yourself, you can make them up, right? So be a fictitious person through this class. It will benefit you, however, to do these forward-looking projections as if it were for your first year going out. Nothing you will provide me actually is going to be specific information about your current financial status. Never ask you to turn anything specific in. The most information you'll give me is what you think you might do after graduation and how much you think you'll earn in that job. None of it is actually going to be real personal data. So that being said, fill out your goals for workshop 1 here. That's it.